Adrian Vale's boots squelched in the bioluminescent moss carpeting the landing platform, and he made a mental note that Krevthar's humidity was not a metaphorical concern, but a physical assault on human hair products. The jungle world stretched in every direction, a canopy so dense it created its own weather systems, with trees that reached heights that would make Earth's redwoods feel inadequate. Somewhere in that verdant chaos, creatures called to each other in frequencies that made his inner ear vibrate, and the air smelled like ozone mixed with something floral and vaguely carnivorous. His shuttle pilot, a laconic centauri who'd spent the trip reading romance novels and ignoring Adrian's nervous small talk, powered down the engines with a series of thuds that sounded unhealthy. "Try not to offend anyone," she said without looking up from her datapad. "Krevthari are big on traditions and bigger on holding grudges." "Encouraging," Adrian muttered, shouldering his pack and checking for the third time that his translator was active and updated. The small device sat behind his ear, warm against his skin, displaying a green-ready status that was significantly more reassuring than his last 3 field assignments, where technology had failed at cosmically inconvenient moments. The landing platform itself was a marvel of bioengineering, grown rather than built, with living wood that had been coaxed into landing struts and terminal structures. Bioluminescent sap ran through channels in the surface, pulsing with what Adrian assumed was data transfer or possibly just the tree's circulatory system. The Krevthari had mastered the art of making technology and nature indistinguishable, which made everything beautiful and slightly unnerving. "Adrian!" The shout came from the terminal entrance, and Adrian turned to see Torin barreling toward him with the enthusiasm of a medium-sized shuttle and none of the braking capacity. The impact hug nearly knocked him off his feet, and Adrian was reminded that Krevthari gravity was 0.87 Earth standard, which meant they'd evolved with denser muscle structure and casual strength that could crumple human ribs if they forgot to be gentle. "Good to see you too," Adrian wheezed, patting Torin's shoulder until his friend remembered to release him. "Still working on the humans our fragile concept." Torin stepped back, grinning with all 4 rows of teeth that had terrified Adrian during their first meeting, until he'd learned it was the Krevthari equivalent of a friendly smile. His skin was doing that color shift thing, patterns rippling across deep green in shades Adrian's database labeled as joy and excitement. The Krevthari wore their emotions on their skin, literally, which made poker games impossible but conversations refreshingly honest. "You brought the coffee?" Torin asked, eyeing Adrian's pack with hope that transcended species. 2 kilos of Terran dark roast, ethically sourced, possibly worth more than my shuttle ticket. Adrian pulled out the vacuum-sealed package, and Torin clutched it like a religious artifact. "Your letters made it sound like Krevthari beverages were a crime against taste buds." "Our traditional morning drink is fermented tree sap that tastes like regret and smells worse," Torin confirmed. "Coffee is proof humans got at least one thing right. Come on, family is waiting, and Mother has been cooking for 2 days because she's convinced humans need constant feeding or we'll break." They moved through the terminal, more grown structures that curved and spiraled in ways that suggested the Krevthari had strong opinions about straight lines being boring. Other travelers passed by. A merchant whose skin flickered with business anxiety orange, a group of younglings whose patterns shifted rapidly through a dozen colors, in what appeared to be a conversation conducted entirely through pigmentation, and an elder whose skin had settled into the deep, complex patterns that marked someone who'd lived long enough to have earned decorative complexity. "So, your family knows I'm completely ignorant of local customs and will probably insult someone accidentally?" Adrian asked as they exited into what he could only describe as structured jungle. The compound rose ahead, buildings woven into massive trees, platforms connected by living bridges, all of it glowing softly with bioluminescent infrastructure. "I prepared them. Father finds human awkwardness charming." Mother has read 6 books on Terran etiquette and will probably ask if you need a fork. My younger siblings think you're exotic and will want to touch your hair. Torin paused at a bridge, his skin flickering to something that might have been nervousness. And Kess will probably just stare at you. Your older sister, the xenobotanist. Adrian had done his research, which mostly consisted of reading Torin's family messages and looking at public research papers. You mentioned she's intense. Kess is. Torin searched for words in Terran Standard, his translator offering suggestions he rejected with head shakes. Focused, protective, very traditional about some things and completely revolutionary about others. She's brilliant, respected, and hasn't shown romantic interest in anyone for 5 years, which drives Mother insane because Krevthari usually bond young. And she's going to stare at me because you're the first human I've brought home, and she takes her role as eldest sibling very seriously. She'll be evaluating whether you're a good influence. Torin started across the bridge, which swayed gently under their combined weight. Just be yourself. Worst case, she decides you're corrupting me and challenges you to ritual combat. You're joking. Probably joking, Torin said, which was not reassuring. The compound's central platform opened before them, a circular space carved from the convergence of 3 massive trees, their trunks forming natural walls decorated with carved clan symbols that glowed in the humid air. A family group waited, and Adrian's journalist instincts cataloged details. 2 parent figures, 3 younger Krevthari bouncing with barely contained energy, and standing slightly apart, a woman who made Adrian understand why prey animals freeze when predators look at them. Kess was taller than Torin by at least 6 inches, which put her well over 6.5 feet by Adrian's estimate. Her skin was deep bronze marked with traditional clan patterns in darker pigment, geometric designs that wrapped around her arms and disappeared under her simple work tunic. Her hair was bound in an intricate braid woven with what appeared to be living vines, and her eyes tracked Adrian's approach with the kind of focus that suggested she was calculating his velocity, mass, and probably structural weaknesses. Family, this is Adrian, Torin announced with the pride of someone showing off a particularly interesting specimen. Adrian, this is everyone. The introductions proceeded with enthusiastic hand-touching from the younger siblings who did indeed want to feel his hair. Warm welcomes from his parents, whose skin showed welcoming yellows and friendly greens. And a single nod from Kess, who hadn't stopped watching him, with an intensity that made Adrian check his reflection in a nearby window to see if he'd grown a second head. Her skin was doing something complex, patterns shifting through colors Adrian's database was working overtime to interpret. Heightened interest, the translator whispered. Evaluation mode. Assessment protocol. And underneath it all, something it labeled as curiosity with a footnote suggesting the translation might be incomplete. It's an honor to visit, Adrian managed, using the formal greeting Torin had taught him. Your home is beautiful. Kess's skin flickered to something his translator couldn't identify at all, and she spoke for the first time, her voice deeper than he'd expected, each word precisely formed in Terran Standard. We will see if you still think so after the jungle tries to eat you during morning fog. The younger siblings laughed. Torin's parents smiled with the patience of those who'd raised someone with Kess's sense of humor. And Adrian got the distinct impression he was being tested in ways he didn't yet understand. Torin grabbed his pack, leading him toward one of the residential structures, but Adrian glanced back to find Kess still watching from the platform's edge, her expression unreadable and her skin settling into colors that suggested she'd finished her initial evaluation and reached some kind of conclusion she wasn't sharing. Your sister is terrifying, Adrian told Torin once they were out of earshot. Yes, Torin agreed cheerfully, but she grows on you, like a particularly aggressive fungus. Adrian laughed despite his nervousness, following his friend deeper into the compound while trying to ignore the feeling that he'd just been catalogued, assessed, and filed under some category he really hoped was acceptable guest and not interesting research specimen. Above them, the jungle canopy filtered light into green-gold shadows. Creatures called in frequencies that made his bones hum, and somewhere behind them, Kess watched from her balcony position with the patient intensity of someone who'd found something worth studying and had all the time in the world to understand it. The morning brought humidity that could drown unprepared lungs and a wake-up call in the form of Torin's youngest sibling, Pick, who had apparently been assigned to ensure the exotic human survived his first night without being consumed by aggressive flora. The kid stood at Adrian's doorway, skin flickering curious orange, holding what appeared to be a breathing mask. "For fog walk," Pick explained, thrusting the device forward. "Tree spores. Make human sneeze until brain comes out nose." "Graphic but appreciated," Adrian said, accepting the mask and making a note to add weaponized tree spores to his growing list of Krevthar's survival concerns. Breakfast was a family affair held in the central gathering hall, a space where walls opened directly to the jungle canopy and bioluminescent creatures drifted past like lazy fireworks. The table itself was living wood that had been convinced to grow into furniture, and the food arrived in vessels that appeared to be large leaves engineered into bowls. Adrian navigated the meal with careful attention, accepting Torin's quiet guidance on what was safe for human consumption versus what would cause digestive rebellion, as his friend diplomatically phrased it. The proteins shifted flavor mid-chew, starting savory and finishing sweet. The fruits fizzed on his tongue with carbonation that occurred naturally, and the soup. "You have to sing to it first," Torin hissed urgently as Adrian reached for the steaming bowl that had just been placed before him. "I have to what?" "Sing any tone. It's temperature reactive, it heats itself when it detects vocalization. If you don't." Adrian had already lifted the bowl. The soup responded to his body heat by flash boiling with a vigor that sent scalding liquid across his hand. He yelped, dropping the bowl, and chaos erupted as Torin's mother rushed over with healing gel, while the younger siblings dissolved into laughter and Torin muttered apologies. "New human rule," Kess said from across the table, speaking for the first time that morning. "All food is a potential enemy until proven otherwise." Her skin showed amusement purple, and Adrian caught what might have been the edge of a smile before she returned her attention to her own meal. He noticed she'd been watching him navigate breakfast with the same focused intensity from yesterday, though now it seemed less evaluative and more something else his translator couldn't quite parse. After the healing gel had worked its minor miracle and Adrian's hand stopped throbbing, conversation resumed. Torin's father asked polite questions about Earth. The younger siblings wanted to know if humans could really only see 3 primary colors, and Torin's mother kept offering him more food with the concern of someone convinced humans were moments away from starvation. "Can you pass the grain dish?" Adrian asked Torin, using a hand gesture he'd seen in his pre-trip research, palm up, fingers slightly curled in what the database had labeled as polite request signal. The table went silent. Every Krevthari froze mid-motion, and Adrian had the sinking feeling he'd just made his second catastrophic mistake of the morning. Kess's skin flushed deep crimson, patterns racing across her arms in configurations Adrian's database was frantically trying to interpret. Torin's parents exchanged a look loaded with enough significance to collapse a small star. The younger sibling's eyes went wide, and Pick made a sound that might have been a giggle or possibly a warning siren. "Adrian," Torin said carefully, his own skin flickering nervous yellow. "That gesture, in our culture it doesn't mean please pass." "What does it mean?" Kess stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor with a sound that made Adrian's spine straighten. She said something in rapid Krevthari that his translator caught fragments of. Appropriate timing, clear signal, and possibly finally, though that one had a question mark attached. "It means," Torin continued, looking like he wanted to be anywhere else in the galaxy, "that you're open to courtship consideration. receptive to romantic approach. It's a very specific signal that, oh no. Kess had circled the table and was standing beside Adrian's chair, with an expression that mixed determination with something that might have been nervousness beneath the formal composure. She spoke in Terran standard, each word carefully enunciated. "I would like to show you my research laboratory. I believe you would find the hybrid ecosystem studies interesting." It wasn't phrased as a question. Torin made a strangled sound and opened his mouth to interrupt, but his mother placed a hand on his arm with enough pressure to pin him to his seat. His father had the expression of someone watching a historical event unfold, and the younger siblings had gone completely still in the way children do when adults are about to do something fascinating and possibly forbidden. Adrian, oblivious to the subtext and genuinely interested in xenobotany, stood with enthusiasm. "I'd love to. I read your paper on atmospheric nitrogen conversion in hybrid specimens. The methodology was brilliant." Kess's skin did something complicated that made Torin drop his head into his hands. She gestured toward one of the upper platforms, and Adrian followed, missing entirely the way the family watched them leave with expressions ranging from concern to barely suppressed excitement. As they crossed a living bridge toward the laboratory structure, Adrian glanced back to see Torin in animated conversation with his parents while Pick mimed what appeared to be an explosion. He made a mental note to ask about it later, then dismissed it as typical family drama that probably had nothing to do with him. The laboratory was magnificent. Kess had converted an entire upper chamber into a controlled environment where specimens from a dozen worlds grew in carefully maintained conditions. Hydroponic arrays suspended glowing plants that pulsed with bioluminescence. Gene sequencers hummed with quiet efficiency, and displays showed molecular structures rotating in holographic detail. "This is incredible," Adrian said, moving between stations with the reverence of someone who appreciated good science when he saw it. "You're running parallel evolution studies on the atmospheric processors." Kess's formal composure cracked into genuine warmth as she explained her work. They discussed pollination strategies, genetic drift in controlled populations, and the ethical implications of introducing engineered species to established ecosystems. Adrian forgot to be nervous, Kess forgot to be intimidating, and for 20 minutes they were just two scientists sharing passion for their fields. Then Adrian made his third mistake. Leaning over a flowering specimen that glowed soft blue in its containment field, he inhaled its scent and closed his eyes. "Reminds me of home," he said softly. "Earth gardens in summer, jasmine and honeysuckle in warm evenings." He opened his eyes to find Kess staring at him with an expression of such intense emotion that he took an involuntary step back. Her skin had gone through a rapid cascade of colors: surprise gold, joy bright yellow, and then something his translator labeled as fierce determination, in a shade of deep red that seemed significant in ways he didn't understand. She moved to the door with speed that reminded Adrian that Krevthari were apex predators in their evolutionary history. The magnetic seal engaged with a soft hum, and when she turned back to face him, her posture had shifted into something formal and ritualistic. "You're mine now," Kess said in Terran standard, her voice carrying absolute certainty and something underneath that might have been nervousness trying very hard to be brave. Adrian's brain performed several calculations simultaneously, all arriving at the conclusion that he'd somehow gone from laboratory visit to hostage situation without passing through any of the intermediate steps. "I'm what?" Kess stood between him and the only exit, her frame easily blocking the door. She wasn't threatening. Her hands were open, her posture more formal than aggressive, but she was very definitely preventing escape. His translator, finally catching up, whispered, "Bonding claim initiated. Courtship declaration accepted. Romantic pair bond proposed." "There's been a misunderstanding," Adrian said, his voice higher than intended. "I didn't mean the flower thing was just, I'm not trying to." Kess took a step closer, and Adrian realized she was trembling. Not with aggression, but with barely contained emotion, her skin flickering through patterns too rapid for his translator to follow. She was trying to express something important, something that mattered desperately to her, but the rigidity of her formal posture suggested she didn't know how to say it in ways he'd understand. In our culture, she said carefully, sharing sense memory is intimate, vulnerability signal. Combined with courtship receptiveness gesture, it means. She paused, searching for words. It means you trust me with important feelings, that you see potential for bond. I was just commenting on a flower. Adrian's back hit a table full of specimen containers, sending one wobbling. I didn't know that meant, Kess, I don't understand your customs well enough to be making romantic declarations. Her skin flickered to something his translator identified as distress, and her formal posture cracked slightly. But you made the gesture. At breakfast, the open palm request. That means you're considering bonding opportunities. It means I wanted grain. Adrian ran his hands through his hair, a gesture that made Kess's eyes track the movement with focused intensity. This is a catastrophic cultural misunderstanding, and I think we need to call Torin before. Outside the laboratory, something heavy hit the door. Torin's voice came through, muffled but urgent. Kess, open the door. Adrian doesn't understand the protocols. We need family mediation before this becomes an official situation. Kess looked between Adrian and the door, her skin displaying colors his database had given up trying to interpret. But he gave clear signals. I responded appropriately. The claim is legitimate. The claim is a mistake. Adrian tried to gentle his voice, seeing genuine confusion and growing distress in her expression. I didn't mean to signal anything. I'm sorry if I misled you, but humans don't do courtship through hand gestures and flower comments. We use words, direct words, explicit consent. The door lock disengaged with a hiss, and Torin burst through, followed by both parents and what appeared to be an extremely elderly Krefthari whose skin bore patterns so complex they looked like living artwork. The elder took one look at Kess and Adrian, the locked door, and the emotional chaos written across both their faces, and sighed with the weariness of someone who'd seen this exact scenario play out across generations. Well, the elder said in Terran standard so flawless it made Adrian's translator seem redundant. This is going to require some very creative cultural mediation. The elder, who introduced herself as Matriarch Sivin, had everyone sit in a circle on the laboratory floor like children, about to receive a lecture on why setting things on fire was discouraged. Adrian found himself between Torin and his father, while Kess sat across from him with her mother beside her in what appeared to be moral support formation. Let me understand the situation, Sivin said, her voice carrying the kind of calm that came from witnessing countless disasters and developing immunity to surprise. Adrian made the courtship receptiveness gesture at breakfast, unknowingly. Kess interpreted this as invitation, correctly by our customs. Adrian then shared intimate sense memory in her laboratory, which Kess understood as emotional vulnerability signal, also correct by our customs. Kess responded with formal bonding claim, which Adrian did not understand because humans apparently conduct romance like they're negotiating trade agreements, with excessive talking. That's mostly accurate, Adrian admitted. Except the part about trade agreements, we're usually worse at those. Torin's mother made a sound that might have been a laugh poorly suppressed. Kess's skin was cycling through colors that suggested internal emotional chaos her formal posture was trying desperately to contain. The problem, Sivin continued, is that Kess's claim was made in accordance with traditional protocols. In our culture, once a bonding claim is declared and the door sealed, the courtship period has officially begun. Breaking it requires either mutual agreement after proper exploration period or formal rejection that dishonors both parties. What if it was just a misunderstanding? Adrian asked. Can't we just explain that I didn't know what I was doing and and humiliate my daughter by suggesting she claimed someone who didn't want to be claimed. Kess's mother interrupted, her skin flashing protective orange. That she misread signals so completely, she trapped an unwilling partner. That's not what Adrian stopped, seeing Kess's skin go pale, patterns fading to barely visible against her bronze tone. She was staring at the floor, and he realized with uncomfortable clarity that from her perspective, she'd followed every proper protocol, and was now being told her romantic interest was a mistake built on human incompetence. Torin leaned close to whisper, "Our courtship claims are sacred. Rejecting one outright is devastating. It suggests the person isn't worthy of consideration. Kess has never claimed anyone before. This is huge for her." Adrian looked at Kess, really looked at her, and saw beneath the fierce warrior exterior to the vulnerability she was trying to hide. Her hands were clenched in her lap, her ears pressed flat in what his database finally identified as shame and distress, and her skin patterns had retreated to the kind of muted display that indicated someone trying to make themselves smaller. "I don't want to hurt her," Adrian said quietly, "but I also don't want to be claimed by someone who locked me in a room because I commented on a flower." "Then perhaps," Sivan said, her ancient eyes sharp with an intelligence that had probably negotiated countless cultural crises, "we need a compromise that honors both your customs and ours." She explained that Krevthari law included provisions for cross-species situations, which made sense given their growing galactic presence. When bonding claims involved partners from different cultures, there was an option for what translated roughly as exploratory association, a 30-day period where both parties could learn each other's customs without formal obligation, essentially pausing the claim while they determined compatibility. "It's not dating," Sivan clarified. "It's more formal than that, but it's not a binding commitment either. Think of it as supervised cultural exchange with romantic potential." "Supervised?" Adrian asked. Torin grinned. "Means I get to chaperone and mock you both extensively while pretending it's for propriety." "Wonderful," Kess muttered, speaking for the first time since the mediation began. Her skin was slowly returning to normal colors, though embarrassment pink still dominated her patterns. Sivan turned to Kess. "You scared him. You need to understand that human courtship requires explicit verbal consent, not gestural interpretation. Locking him in your laboratory was, from his cultural perspective, aggressive and frightening." "I was following proper protocols," Kess said, but her voice was small. "By our standards, yes. By his, you were a very large person blocking his only exit and declaring ownership." Sivan's tone was gentle but firm. "If you want this association to work, you must learn his customs as much as he learns ours." Kess looked up at Adrian for the first time since the mediation began. "I frightened you." "Terrified me," Adrian admitted. "I thought I was being kidnapped by a very attractive scientist with concerning boundary issues." Her skin flickered with surprise and one corner of her mouth twitched. "You think I'm attractive? I think you're brilliant, intense, and possibly could break me in half without trying, which is a confusing combination to process while locked in a room." Torin's father made a choking sound that was definitely suppressed laughter. Sivan's eyes gleamed with amusement, and even Kess's mother looked like she was reconsidering her protective anger. "So," Sivan said, "do we proceed with exploratory association? 30 days, both of you learning each other's customs, with the understanding that either party can withdraw honorably at the end if compatibility isn't there." Adrian looked at Kess, who was watching him with an expression that mixed hope with fear of rejection. She was overwhelming, yes. Terrifying in her intensity, absolutely. But beneath that was someone who'd seen signals she thought were clear, followed traditions she thought were right, and was now realizing she'd scared someone she'd been trying to honor. "I need you to understand something," Adrian said, addressing Kess directly. "If we do this, you can't just decide things for me. No locking doors, no bonding claims, no assumptions based on hand gestures I don't understand. You have to talk to me, use words, ask questions. That sounds inefficient, Kess said, but her skin was brightening to colors his translator identified as cautious optimism. Humans are inefficient. We use excessive talking because we're bad at reading each other's minds and worse, at reading alien skin patterns. Your species sounds exhausting. Wait until you experience our confusion about which fork to use at formal dinners, Adrian said, and was rewarded with what might have been an actual smile from Kess, small and hesitant but genuine. Sivan stood, her ancient bones creaking with the sound of someone who'd earned the right to complain about stairs. Then it settled. 30-day exploratory association begins now. Kess, you will learn human courtship customs, which apparently require the verbal skills of a contract negotiator. Adrian, you will learn Krevthari bonding traditions, which require the interpretive skills of a cryptographer. Torin will chaperone to ensure nobody gets claimed, locked up, or accidentally married. And everyone will try very hard not to start an interspecies incident that I'll have to mediate at my age. The family dispersed with varying levels of relief and amusement. Torin's parents looked pleased with the outcome. The younger siblings disappointed there hadn't been more drama, and Torin himself wore the expression of someone already composing stories to tell at Adrian's eventual funeral. As the laboratory emptied, Kess approached Adrian with the careful movements of someone trying not to spook a nervous animal. I apologize for frightening you. In my culture, the claim process is honored and celebratory. I didn't understand it would feel like captivity to you. And I apologize for being completely oblivious to your customs and accidentally signal that I was interested when I was just trying to be polite. Adrian offered his hand for the Krevthari finger-touch greeting, the one gesture he was now confident wouldn't accidentally propose marriage. Can we start over? Hi, I'm Adrian. I'm a journalist. I make terrible decisions involving alien customs, and I apparently need a 30-day course in not accidentally courting people. Kess touched his fingers with hers and her skin flickered to warm yellow. I'm Kess. I'm a xenobotanist. I'm very bad at understanding that other species don't communicate through skin colors, and I may have just claimed the first person to ever call me attractive while simultaneously terrified. To be fair, those aren't mutually exclusive states. I'm learning that about humans. She hesitated, then added, would you like to continue the laboratory tour, with the door unlocked this time? And possibly, Torin standing guard to ensure I don't make more claiming gestures. I heard that, Torin called from the corridor. And yes, I'm absolutely standing guard. Someone has to protect Adrian from your overwhelming romantic competence. Kess's skin flashed embarrassed pink, but she was smiling, a real smile that transformed her fierce features into something warm and almost shy. Adrian found himself smiling back, thinking that maybe catastrophic cultural misunderstandings could lead to interesting places, assuming they didn't kill him first. All right, he said, show me your hybrid ecosystems. But if I comment on any smells, just assume it's scientific interest and not an invitation to claim me. Noted, Kess said, and there was enough amusement in her voice that Adrian suspected the next 30 days were going to be either the most fascinating or most terrifying experience of his life. Possibly both, he thought, following her back into the laboratory while Torin took up guard position at the door and offered running commentary on proper courtship protocols that helped absolutely no one. The next morning arrived with Torin delivering what he called emergency cultural education materials, which turned out to be a stack of datapads, several holographic displays, and a handwritten chart labeled "Things that will get you accidentally claimed." A comprehensive guide. This is 7 pages long, Adrian said, staring at the chart. How do you people function with this many romantic landmines? Practice and genetic memory, Torin said cheerfully. Also, most Krevthari grow up learning this. You're getting the crash course because you pointed at grain wrong. They were in Adrian's guest quarters, morning light filtering through the living walls while jungle sounds provided ambient chaos outside. Kes had sent a message earlier requesting a properly chaperoned botanical garden walk at midday, phrased with such formal correctness that Adrian suspected she'd consulted multiple etiquette guides before composing it. "She's trying really hard," Torin observed, reading over Adrian's shoulder. "Kes doesn't do formal requests. She usually just tells people what's happening and expects compliance." "Should I be honored or concerned?" "Both. She's never been interested in anyone long enough to modify her communication style. The family is treating this like a historical event." Torin pulled up a holographic display showing Krevthari skin pattern meanings. "Now let's discuss the 17 colors that mean I'm interested versus the 12 that mean I'm just being polite versus the 3 that mean I'm considering whether you'd make good research data." The education session lasted 3 hours and left Adrian's head spinning with information. He learned that Krevthari courtship involved complex pattern displays, ritual gift exchanges of scientifically interesting specimens, and something called harmonizing, where potential partners synchronize their skin colors during conversation as a sign of emotional compatibility. "What if I can't change colors?" Adrian asked. "Seems like a fundamental compatibility issue." "Then Kes will have to learn to read human expressions, which apparently require decoding facial micro-movements, instead of just looking at someone's skin like a reasonable species." Torin grinned. "You're both entering this with handicaps. Should be entertaining." At midday, Adrian met Kes in the central garden platform, with Torin trailing behind at what he called respectful chaperone distance, and Adrian called close enough to rescue me if things go wrong. Kes wore what appeared to be formal outdoor attire, practical but decorated with clan patterns, and her skin was displaying colors that Adrian's morning education identified as nervous anticipation and determined optimism. "I have prepared a route through the hybrid garden sections," Kes announced with the formality of someone presenting a research proposal. "I will explain the specimens, you will ask questions as desired, and Torin will ensure we maintain proper courtship boundaries as defined by both our customs." "This sounds like the most awkward nature walk in galactic history," Adrian said. "Probably," Kes agreed, and her skin flickered with amusement purple that made her seem instantly more approachable. They walked through gardens where earth plants grew alongside Krevthari specimens in carefully balanced ecosystems. Kes explained her hybridization work with genuine passion, her formal nervousness dissolving into expertise as she discussed pollination strategies and genetic adaptation. Adrian asked questions about atmospheric requirements and soil composition, and somewhere between discussing nitrogen cycles and root systems, the awkwardness faded into actual conversation. "You really love this work," Adrian observed, watching her examine a hybrid flowering plant that glowed with bioluminescence borrowed from its Krevthari parent species. "It's the closest I can come to creating new life," Kes said, then immediately tensed, her skin flashing embarrassed pink. "That sounded more intimate than intended." "It sounded honest," Adrian said. "Humans understand passion for work. We just express it through excessive talking rather than color changes." "Your species really does talk constantly," Kes said, but she was smiling. "Is it exhausting?" "Extremely. But we're also bad at knowing what others are thinking, so we compensate with words." Adrian paused at a bench grown from living wood, gesturing to ask if they could sit. Kes's skin flickered approval, and they settled with Torin taking a position nearby, pretending to examine a plant while obviously listening to every word. "I need to understand something," Kes said, her formal composure returning. "In human culture, how do you indicate romantic interest without gestures or color changes? We ask people out. Would you like to have dinner with me, or can I take you to see a film? Direct verbal invitations to spend time together in contexts that might be romantic." Kes's skin displayed confusion orange. But how do you know if they're interested before asking? Don't you risk rejection and humiliation? Yes, constantly. Human courtship is basically a series of risk assessments where we try to determine interest through subtle verbal cues and then panic about whether we're reading them correctly. Adrian laughed at her expression. It's a terrible system, but it's what we have. So when you made the gesture at breakfast, you weren't signaling interest. You were just asking for grain. Correct. And when I commented on the flower smell, I was just sharing a nostalgic memory, not declaring emotional vulnerability. Your customs make no sense, Kes said, but her skin was brightening with understanding. How do humans ever successfully bond if everything requires verbal negotiation? Very slowly and with lots of confusion, Adrian admitted. But we value explicit consent. We want to know that our partners choose us with full understanding, not because we read a gesture correctly. Kes was quiet for a moment, her patterns shifting through colors Adrian was learning to recognize as deep thought. In our culture, the gesture is the consent. We train from childhood to understand the signals. When someone makes the courtship receptiveness gesture, they know what they're communicating. Which is beautiful in its own way, Adrian said. But it doesn't work when one partner doesn't know the language. So we're both trying to communicate romance in languages the other doesn't speak. Exactly. Which is why Sivan's exploratory association idea might actually work. We learn each other's languages. Kes turned to face him fully, and her expression was serious. I need to ask directly, in human custom. Adrian, are you interested in exploring romantic potential with me? Not because of gestures or claims or traditions, but because you want to. The directness caught him off guard, and Adrian took a moment to really consider the question. Kes was overwhelming, yes. Intimidating, absolutely. But she was also brilliant, passionate about her work, and trying so hard to understand customs that made no sense to her. And when she smiled, really smiled without the formal armor, she was stunning in ways that had nothing to do with physical appearance. I'm interested in learning more about you, Adrian said carefully. I can't promise romantic feelings because I've known you for 2 days and spent half that time terrified. But I'm interested in seeing if we're compatible, in understanding your culture and letting you understand mine. Is that enough for now? Kes's skin bloomed with colors his translator identified as profound relief and cautious joy. That is more than I expected after locking you in my laboratory. Setting the bar low works in your favor, Adrian said, and was rewarded with her laugh, warm and genuine and entirely at odds with her fierce reputation. Torin wandered over with the casual timing of someone who'd been waiting for the right moment. So, now that we've established mutual interest in exploration, can we discuss the fact that family dinner tonight will be incredibly awkward because everyone knows about the claiming incident? How does everyone know? Adrian asked. Pick told the entire extended family within 6 hours. You're now famous as the human who accidentally courted the uncourtable one. Torin's skin showed amusement. Grandfather wants to meet you. Several cousins have bets on whether you'll survive 30 days. And Aunt Sivra is already planning bonding ceremony decorations just in case. We're not bonding, Kes said firmly, though her skin flickered with something that might have been pleased at the thought. We're exploring compatibility. With the entire family watching like it's entertainment, Torin added helpfully. Adrian dropped his head into his hands. This is going to be a very long 30 days. Yes, Kes agreed. But when he looked up, she was smiling at him with an expression that mixed nervousness with something that might have been hope. But perhaps interesting. Definitely interesting, Adrian admitted, thinking that he'd come to Krevthar for a simple visit and somehow ended up in the most complicated cultural exchange program ever attempted. But watching Kes's skin shift through colors that his translator finally confidently identified as happiness, he found himself thinking that complicated might not be entirely bad. Assuming he survived the family dinner, the betting pools, and whatever courtship rituals Kes decided to attempt next, with proper verbal warning this time, hopefully. "Come on," Torrin said, hauling them both to their feet. "Mother is cooking traditional bonding foods, which means this dinner is going to be either a celebration or a disaster, possibly both." As they walked back toward the compound, Kess's hand brushed against Adrian's. Not a gesture, not a signal, just accidental contact that made her skin flash surprised yellow and his heart do something complicated in his chest. She pulled back immediately, apologetic, but Adrian caught her hand deliberately, holding it with the kind of intentional choice humans required. "Is this okay?" he asked. In human custom, holding hands is a sign of romantic interest. "I'm interested," verbally declaring it now so there's no confusion.